Gilded shadows, Philip's somber ascendancy. A swath of amber candlelight flickers down the marbled gallery. The subtle tang of incense lingers behind a parade of boot heels and brocade. This is the world awaiting the young Philip II, the night his father, Charles V, abdicates. You watch as the courtiers bow, faces both awed and veiled by fatigue, their whispers merging with the tapestry-silenced echoes. For all the grandeur, shadows seem to press just outside the gold leaf in the pageantry. Philip is handed not just a crown, but the weight of an empire that stretches from the sunlit plains of Castile to the silvered Andes. And with this vast inheritance he receives, unseen but palpable, a burden of expectation and an incubating sense of isolation. Philip's upbringing was marked by rigid formality, the careful molding of Spanish Catholicism, and the tutelage of those who favored caution over display. Now, as king, he stands in halls decorated with memories, not friends. Even his closest advisors treat him with distant respect, for every movement is weighed by politics and by the monumental legacy of Charles. The shadow of his father is more than historical. It haunts every decision, silently insisting that Philip strive to be infallible, unyielding, if not divine. Not. On the surface, Spain gleams. Ships bring treasures from the New World, gold, turquoise, and whispers of lands incalculable. Courtiers debate matters of state by torchlight, and Europe's map is subtly redrawn with every royal gesture or papal letter. All eyes turn to Philip. The world expects not only a king but a pillar, a protector of Catholic orthodoxy amid the churning heresies that threaten Christendom. Such public expectations, though, foster a divide inside the young monarch. Outward tranquility masks an inward storm. Even here, historians continue to wrestle with Philip's inner world. Some propose that he was cold and aloof by nature. Others point to traces of insecurity and melancholy inherited from his Habsburg forebears. The debate endures. Did power make him distant, or was it a brittle armor worn against personal unease? The record offers clues: private letters written in an unsteady hand, a rare joke with a trusted assistant, the meticulously scheduled hours that betray a need for control. All serve as brushstrokes in a portrait both formidable and fragile. As dusk deepens, you sense more than regal trappings in these corridors. Gilt and velvet cannot banish the prickling fear of failure, the nocturnal pulse of anxiety. The great tapestries hide drafts, but not doubt. Tonight, Philip is trapped in a paradox as old as monarchy, publicly adored, privately encircled. When he climbs the palace stairs, the hush behind him is heavy, every ambition, every secret flaw, pacing just a step behind. Remember that for Philip, accession meant more than glory. It was also a trap, a lattice of duty closing around youthful curiosity and vulnerability. In this moment, Spain's new king stands draped not only in the symbols of power, but in the invisible vestments of responsibility and fear. Ceremonial music fades away, yet it is replaced only by the low, unending hum of expectation, the overture to a life increasingly devoured by forces both external and intimate. Veins of power, the weight of empire. It is morning in the Alcazar, yet the air is already thick with news, reports arriving on parchment, sealed in wax, from every compass point. In the king's study, the maps are enormous, unfurled hides depicting lands as textured veins, ink rivers spilling from Mexico to Manila. You observe young Philip as he hunches over dispatches from weary ambassadors, his brow furrowing at troubling margins, smoldering crises in the Netherlands, fragile truces in Italy, rebellion bubbling beneath the gold-leaf surface of Granada. The imagined grandeur of empire reveals itself here as a tangle of obligations and careful choreography. No movement permitted to slip, for even a monarch's misstep could ignite a continent. Philip learns that his father's legacy is not only the scepter, but also the sleeplessness. His desk overflows with minutiae, disputes between priests, the mishandling of colonial taxes, outbreaks of plague in Seville, the persistent threat of Ottoman galleys on the Mediterranean. An insomniac discipline sets in. His days are measured by the relentless tick of clockwork and the drone of clerks reciting inventories. Descriptions from those who observed him up close speak of a man visibly tightening, shoulders drawn in, mouth taut, hands surprised by tremors, as he reads the latest news of war or famine. At this juncture, a paradox emerges. Philip's famed attention to detail, once praised as kingly devotion, becomes his torment. The machinery of empire can only move at the pace he allows, and so he tightens his grip ever further. To many onlookers, the king seems less sovereign than captive, shackled by the empire's magnitude and the impossibility of omnipresence. The harder he works, the more vigilantly he oversees court, army, and treasury, the farther he drifts from satisfaction. The palace grows cold not just from stone, but from a hierarchy grown rigid under his rule. Here, a surprising psychological insight takes root. Unlike the flamboyant kings of France or the mercurial Medici, Philip emerges as Europe's penitent, a ruler haunted by his own conscience, whose compulsion for certainty inadvertently amplifies doubt. Royal biographers combing his ledgers and marginalia uncover moments of nervous revision, prayers scribbled in between accounting columns, midnight instructions voided and rescripted at dawn. Historians argue whether these were gestures of religious piety or defenses against an encroaching sense of helplessness. Philip's empire, after all, was ungovernably vast, its arteries liable to hemorrhage at any moment. Did he trust God or procedure more? One day, a minor revolt flares in the province of Aragon. It is swiftly crushed, but Philip insists on reading every witness statement himself, late into the night, candle guttering near exhaustion. He emerges hollow-eyed, satisfied in detail but battered by the knowledge that such vigilance can neither prevent nor predict rebellion. Even within his family, unrest simmers. The constant expectation of discipline breeds suspicion, with relatives wondering if they are subject to paternal affection or royal scrutiny. Remember the oppressive expectancy woven through Philip's ascension, how admiration and fear are twin weights on the crown's velvet. The fabric of empire rubs his skin raw, and countless letters, battles, reforms, and rituals can never quite soothe the underlying friction. Grand halls and map rooms become both his dominion and his confessional, places where the cost of power, unseen and unrelenting, etches itself deeper with every morning's tide of responsibility. Inquisitor and father, love ensnared by duty. Beyond council chambers and silent crypts, you're drawn into the intimate precincts of Philip's private life. In these candlelit interludes, where laughter is soft and footsteps are hers alone, you sense that love here must kneel before duty's altar. With each whispered devotion or stumble of childish feet against echoing stone, the Spanish king is reminded, no relationship is untouched by the icy fingers of the crown or the relentless gaze of faith. Consider Philip's marriages, especially his union with Mary of England. Painted by court artists as mutual respect, the alliance was forged in politics and shadowed by expectation. What little tenderness managed to surface between them wilted beneath the weight of dynastic ambition and the ever-present fear of failure. Mary's devastating miscarriage is an echo of Europe's unsteady peace. In personal correspondence, Philip's tone vacillates. Affectionate in Latin flourishes, icily formal as political tides shift. To those closest to him, he remains a mystery, capable of fleeting warmth but forever obeying some higher, remorseless calling. His relationship with his children bears similar wounds. The most notorious is with Don Carlos, Philip's eldest son. For every candlelight lesson in Latin or policy, suspicion nestles in the king's heart. Don Carlos is passionate, unruly, bright-eyed but troubled. Rumors swirl through the palace, fueled by whispers from servants and ambassadors, accusing the heir of madness, treason, even an Oedipal urge to destroy his own father. Some courtiers see only a sickly, misunderstood youth, others see a legitimate threat. Philip, isolated by the burden of the empire, cannot afford paternal tenderness to cloud judgment. He orders Don Carlos confined, and when his son dies under mysterious fever-ridden circumstances, suspicion blooms on every tongue. Historians still debate. Did Philip imprison Don Carlos out of cold calculation, or was it the desperate act of a father tormented by his own failings and terrors? The king's faith in the Inquisition's methods further deepens the darkness. Philip refuses to separate divine will from royal policy. Family, love, and loyalty are all subject to interrogation and confession. In his mind, heresy lurking in the soul of Europe is no different from the malignancy haunting his own household. Here you glimpse a monarch for whom intimacy is always suspect, a man convinced that personal indulgence will invite divine retribution, that affection without discipline is a portal for chaos. This mindset saturates every chamber. The queen sighs behind closed doors, The snatched moments of laughter with infant daughters, the wary suppers with distant cousins. With each passing year, family gatherings become studies in control. Even celebration is stained with the formal blood of religious ritual. Love itself becomes another arena for penance. Yet within this unyielding fortress of discipline, there are almost imperceptible moments. Philip's gesture of smoothing his daughter Isabella's hair, a sardonic smile offered to his confessor, fleeting as a tremor. These glimpses tantalize biographers. Were they betrayals of principle, or evidence of a man gradually succumbing to his own loneliness? Such ambiguities fuel endless debate. Remember the king's grinding need for order and certainty, the same force locking empire and bloodline alike in a maze of suspicion and sacrifice. For Philip II, the lines between sovereign, inquisitor, father, and penitent blur and tighten, each role corroding the next. By entrapping love within the vice of duty, the king's private world grows ever more silent, the warmth of family smothered beneath the ashen weight of piety and absolute rule. The anatomy of suffering, illness, faith, and control. You follow the king now into the inner sanctum, a series of interconnected rooms, redolent with the sharp tang of medicated oils and the muted whispers of chamberlains. Here, between tapestry-lined walls and wooden crucifixes, Philip's fortress begins to betray him. For all his control acumen, neither discipline nor empire can halt the tide of illness that creeps, spectral, through the Spanish court. Reports of disease seeping in from the Mediterranean and news of outbreaks sweltering through the slums of Seville reach Philip's desk with growing urgency. Plague, influenza, dysentery, fevers unnamed. These are not only the plagues of the common folk. The king himself feels their chilling approach in beleaguered limbs and a tightening chest. Each morning becomes a negotiation between his iron will and a body quietly rebelling. His schedule remains severe. Hours parceled to prayer, endless audiences, the reading and annotating of legal documents. But with each day, he musters more effort simply to rise. You see the king scrutinize his own reflection, startled by the pallor beneath his eyes. He drinks concoctions prescribed by royal physicians, bitter draughts soured with herbs, peculiar balms applied to his legs, all designed to ward off what is politely called the king's malady. Behind the closed doors of his privy chamber, his body is probed by doctors in uneasy silence. Stool samples are collected, urine studied, his pulses counted with anxious concentration. The language of dominion replaced by the lexicon of suffering. Behind these physical struggles, faith and superstition braid themselves ever tighter around Philip's psyche. He seeks meaning in suffering, convinced at moments that every chill or lesion is a test set by God, a chance for penance and purification. He fasts rigidly, sometimes to the point of weakness, believing that denial might bargain away both hellfire and earthly anguish. His confessor logs these excesses in secret, worried. Yet Philip will not cease. From his vantage point, pain is proof of virtue, a currency for divine favor, an inescapable cost for someone who stands as Christendom's last bulwark. One particular feverish episode shakes the Spanish court. The king's skin burns, so brilliant with heat it seems luminous. Servants drape his bed in linen soaked with vinegar, while the closest allies gather just beyond heavy doors, voicing prayers and rumors in equal measure. Some whisper that poison is to blame, an untraceable enemy, no doubt lurking within his own household. Others, more charitable, insist it is the accumulated strain of empire, the physical toll of worries borne too long. Historians can never agree. Was it malaria, a chronic infection, or perhaps a psychosomatic collapse arising from the machinery of control lurching out of balance? The symptoms, swelling, fever, immobilizing pain, persist, and with every recurrence the king's authority falters, unseen fissures spiderwebbing the empire. The lesser-known truth emerges in quiet anecdotes. The king's obsession with ritual, his fasting push to extremes, his increasingly lengthy consultations with both doctors and priests. Even as sickness racks his body, Philip's routines grow stricter, the very attempt to master disease and disorder by tightening life's framework. But faith and regimen cannot cure everything. You witness, in the twilight hush of his chambers, how the king shudders against both physical agony and the terrifying idea that God might no longer be listening. Remember how earlier Philip's drive to dominate the empire's chaos led only to more anxiety. Now, as disorder arises from within, every act of control becomes both solace and torment, a prayer for relief mingled with the haunting suspicion that one's suffering is not redemptive, but simply a sign that some deeper malady, spiritual, political, or personal, has taken root. The prison of the Escorial, isolation and obsession. The air at San Lorenzo del Escorial is sharper, colder. The wind scouring from the mountains, the sun cresting behind slate roofs and granite walls. Here in this monumental monastery palace, Philip II has built not only a symbol of faith and dominion, but also a sanctuary and a stronghold. You enter through immense doors into echoing, severe corridors, where stone underfoot chills even the most buoyant spirits. The architecture is all lines and discipline, arches chiseled to mathematical purity, shadowy naves that feel more penitent than celebratory. It is as much a keep for the soul as for the body. Philip intended the Escorial to be the crowning jewel of his reign, a dazzling fusion of chapel, mausoleum, and court, a fortress where both king and empire could gather their wits and resources. But as the years pass and his health falters, it begins to morph into something stranger, a labyrinth of solitude and caution, the stone embodiment of a psyche tightening around itself. Beyond the public rituals pulsing through the basilica, you sense how the silence thickens at night, and how little warmth seeps into quarters where ministers tiptoe and monks mutter. The king's most trusted attendants learn quickly to move like ghosts. Inside the royal apartment, the day marches to Philip's obsessive regulation. Each object, crosses precisely aligned, manuscripts stacked by the hour, serves as an anchor against chaos. The king paces alone, peering through narrow windows at Europe's restless horizon, consumed by calculations of loyalty and betrayal. His routine is a ceaseless catechism, hourly prayer, daily consultations on heresy, brief, weighed meetings with children, whose affection is tempered by perpetual scrutiny. Even recreation is governed, permitted only when state and spiritual accounting allow. Anxiety becomes as much a fixture of the Escorial as its polished marble. Rumors circulate among servants. The king has secreted confessions in hollow stones. He consults omens when suffering attacks of nerves or sleeplessness. Some late-night accounts describe the monarch haunted by specters. Dead wives, errant sons, visions conjured by a mind battered by remorse and passivity. The Escorial's cold grandeur, far from dispelling these phantoms, seems to entrap them, giving negative space for every regret and unfinished prayer. There remains historical debate about what drove Philip to this near-monastic existence. Was it the influence of religious orders on a mind long conditioned toward penance, or an apotropaic reaction against threats real and imagined? Some observers think the king's withdrawal is strategic, meant to craft a mystique that awes both friends and foes. Others see it as evidence of psychological unraveling, the inward gaze of a sovereign who, unable to conquer his body's decay or the empire's entropy, turns all force inward, regulating minutiae in a last bid for mastery. Against such debate stands the physical reality. The court's pulse slows, innovation dries, and intimacy all but vanishes. Life at the Escorial is etched in roots between chapel, council, and silent corridors, a choreography of duty that steadily suffocates. Philip's world contracts, narrowing until only a handful of confidants witness the increasing rigidity of his mind and body. His empire endures, but within these walls, a different battle is waged. The fight to master an inner tumult with the same means employed against the external world. Recall the earlier pattern. A drive for order begets anxiety, discipline entraps affection, and now stone itself becomes both protection and confinement. Here at the Escorial, Spain's most powerful man lives closer each day to the heart of his own isolation, a prisoner in a palace carved from obsessive vigilance and unspoken dread. The English catastrophe, Armada, and hubris. Now the scene shifts outward, from stone corridors to restless coasts and thunderous seas. It is 1588, and you witness Philip in the candle-lit gloom of his Escorial study, staring at maps weighted down by chalices and trembling hands. His gaze fixes on England, that Protestant thorn, the outpost of heresy and uncertainty. Years spent in ritual and planning have distilled into a single enterprise, the Spanish Armada. This will be his crusade, God's warship armada, an instrument crafted not only for conquest but for the vindication of Catholic order, Philip's own testament to faith and fate. The scale is staggering. Nearly 130 ships, thousands of men, priests blessing flags, and nobles gambling reputations on the winds. Couriers report ceaselessly on the state of artillery, the temperament of commanders, the rust in the hulls. Philip, ever the micromanager, pores over minutiae, lists of biscuit, gunpowder, new fastenings for the great galleons. His advisors urge delegation, but he cannot surrender control. Not even Neptune can shift his compulsion to know, catalog, direct. As the last letters are sealed, the fate of an empire feels spun from his very sinew. Beneath the bravado lies a king whose confidence is already fraying at the seams. The Armada, for Philip, becomes more than a fleet. It is a wager for redemption, a chance to rewrite the narrative gnawing at the core of his rule. The endless rituals of the Escorial, the walking, the fasting, the ticking of clocks, now echo in the disciplined order of sails and cannon. Yet beneath the ceremonial, anxiety surges. Philip, trusting that divine providence will favor his cause, neglects the contrary winds, the suspicion-laden rivalries among commanders, the brackish rot spreading through the wooden hulls. As you watch the Armada set forth, the channel mist swallowing sails, tension coils. Disaster unravels with the inexorability of nightmare. English fireships so panic at Calais, scattering the mighty fleet. Storms descend in unseasonal fury, grinding Spanish vessels against Ireland's cruel rocks. Panic grips the Admiralty. The myth of Spanish invincibility founders in salt and smoke. Messengers, faces drawn, clothing flecked by rain, bring the news to Philip. The holy enterprise has foundered. He receives the calamity in his private chapel, head bowed in silence that grows ever heavier. Psychologically, the effect is profound. The king's lifelong pattern is retrenched. In the face of catastrophe, he seeks refuge in ritual and self-reproach, amplifying the loneliness already entrenched by the granite walls of the Escorial. Instead of rage, there's an eerie stillness, as if the disaster confirms some inner suspicion he'd always harbored, that even the best-laid schemes, anointed in faith and discipline, can be shattered by unpredictable forces. Historians never agree. Was the Armada a folly born of hubris, a strategic error, or the last desperate act of a king already devoured by fear? Some argue Philip trusted too much in God and too little in human error, that his need for omnipotence blinded him to warnings. Others suggest the disaster stemmed from factors no monarch could control: weather, luck, the fractiousness of empires. The truth seems as gray as the Channel fog. Remember the pattern established: how discipline and faith, when pushed to extremity, collapse inward upon themselves. After the Armada's ruin, Philip's confidence never truly recovers. The chastened king grows even more closed, seeking mastery only in ritual, stone, and suffering. Outside, the world ridicules Spanish power. Inside, Spain's monarch retrenches, leaving the ghostly echo of cannon fire to reverberate through the shivering candlelit silence of the Escorial. Rot from within, sickness unleashed. The Escorial now feels less like a house of God than a mausoleum for the living. Cold mists curl along arcaded hallways and the walls seem to close in, damp, monumental, pitiless. Within the king's heavily curtained private rooms, the odor of suppurating wounds, old incense, and fear hangs thick in the air. You glimpse Philip's figure beneath heavy bedclothes, an emperor diminished, his once steady hands now trembling and mottled. His body rebels with horrifying persistence. The royal physicians, summoned at all hours, bustle through with jars of ointment, cautery irons, and relics meant to ward off evil. They speak in hushed Latin, arguing over the root of the king's torment. A desolate mixture of fevers, purpling ulcerations, excruciating attacks of gout, and, most ghastly, abscesses that gnaw into the bone itself. The pain is constant, severe. Rumors among the courtiers reach fever pitch, talk of deadly curses, divine punishment for the king's excess or Europe's sins, or perhaps even slow poison slipped by foreign agents. Some say the infections came from a mere scratch left untreated. Others are convinced it began far deeper, the legacy of Habsburg blood tainted by centuries of inbreeding. Amid despair and speculation, another reality emerges. The king's meticulous regimens become engines of his own torment. Fasting, rigid confinement, the denial of medical advice contradicting doctrine, each now exacerbates the sickness rather than curing it. The opulence of his surroundings cannot obscure the filth pooling from his wounds or the stench that even ceremonial incense cannot fully mask. You watch as the rhythm of daily life at court warps around his mortal decline. Ministers choose words carefully, worried their faces might betray disgust or opportunism. For even now intrigue simmers. Who will inherit? Who will fall? Who will be remembered as true to Philip, and who as a vulture? The king, once so careful and deliberate, becomes lost in fever dreams. Hours pass as he lies awake, whispering prayers and issuing contradictory commands. Sometimes, in the most lucid moments, he demands an account of each treasury chest and each province's mass attendance as though mortal suffering can be soothed by the recitation of order. At other times he weeps openly, an agony more spiritual than physical. Was this collapse the chastisement of a wrathful God? The question hovers unanswered in every shadowed alcove. There is much debate about the precise cause and course of Philip's illness. Was it severe gout, a systemic infection, or complications from abscesses likely worsened by unsterile 16th-century medicine? Some physicians from court left careful descriptions of foul-smelling wounds on his leg and unhealing ulcers, but later generations suggest his condition was compounded by psychological torment, his remorse, obsessions, and chronic insomnia, the visible wounds reflecting the deep, invisible ones inside. Yet, amidst the bodily decomposition, a strange persistence of control endures. Philip continues to dictate religious festivals and military orders, to review monks' transgressions, to punish courtly slights, and to command the architecture of his own tomb. This need to outthink rot, be it in the body or the state, becomes almost a delirious fixation. His pain is both public punishment and private theater. Courtiers cannot avert their eyes, nor can they help. Recall the king's lifelong struggle, a compulsion for order as the bulwark against inner and outer chaos. Now, with rot overtaking him, that compulsion turns punitive, spotlighting the tragic irony that, in attempting to conquer the world through self-discipline and ritual, Philip has become prisoner, spectacle, and architect of his own decline. The death vigil. The end and the enigma. Within the king's darkened chamber, a morbid hush presides. Each hour is marked not by state business, but by moans half smothered by prayer, and the soft, relentless shuffling of priests, heirs, and physicians. You stand silent among the crowded shadows. The court, normally awash with whispers of intrigue, has transformed the king's sick room into the anxious heart of empire. Philip is hidden beneath layers of linen, face waxen, eyes filmed with agony. The crowd around him is less a gathering of friends than a death watch, each waiting for the weight of centuries to pass from the sickbed to themselves. Here, ritual overtakes all else. Relics are pressed to burned lips, holy water flicked over twisted limbs. You notice the king's obsessive devotion in these final hours. Before accepting a sip of broth or medicine, he insists on confessional, on reciting prayers for the souls of all his children, living and dead. Some in the room whisper that he is bargaining with God, that Philip's torment, worsened by his refusal to forego mortification of the flesh, proves he believed suffering to be an essential passage to redemption. Others see it differently. They wonder if these are the actions of a mind battered by pain and isolation, clinging to ritual because it is the only language left when authority and flesh both fail. His body deteriorates rapidly now. The ulcers turn gangrenous, the stench is unbearable, and pus seeps even as the king begs for more cloth to cover himself. The presence of his son and heir, the future Philip III, inspires tension as much as comfort. Will he inherit genius or madness, ruin or resilience? The courtiers' faces, impassive or unreadable, betray private calculations, ambitions flickering behind practiced displays of grief. The kingdom, too, seems suspended. Who governs when the king is no longer able, yet not quite gone? Power, disease, and legacy are knotted together in every breathless minute. Here, historians find ambiguity that endures. Some accounts contend Philip was lucid until the end, orchestrating final acts of government and instructing his heir with solemn sagacity. Others, reading between panicked letters and medical logs, maintain that much of his last month was spent in hallucinatory agony, gripped by fever, muttering prophecies and regrets to a court too fearful to contradict. The question lingers, did the king's endurance signal superhuman devotion, or the tragic inability to relinquish control even when death offered escape? Philip's final hours are a spectacle. The king, so accustomed to orchestrating every element of court and church, now orchestrates his own demise. His last rites unfold with a formality so grave it is almost theatrical. Candles guttering, choirs murmuring psalms, the air thick with the culmination of years of penance. For most, there is relief in the moment of his passing, a sense that something oppressive at last has slipped free, though none can quite name what it is. Remember the ever-tightening spiral. Each bid for order, each application of discipline, each effort to conquer the unpredictable, has closed the circle tighter until, at the very end, not even the king himself can break free. He departs as he lived, both venerated and pitied, surrounded yet precipitously alone. Philip II's devouring was not only the work of disease, but of the psychological machinery with which he tried to master it. You see in him the eternal struggle of leaders trapped between the necessity of order and the fear of chaos, personal, political, and spiritual. His relentless pursuit of discipline, ritual, and certainty forged one of Europe's greatest empires, but also constructed the walls of his own cell, converting power's promise into a site of perpetual anxiety. Within the stifling gloom of the Escorial, Philip became both sovereign and supplicant, architect and prisoner, forging a legacy out of suffering that would haunt Spain's soul for generations. His sickness was mirrored in the body politic. As his flesh decayed, so too did the vitality and ambition of the empire he had striven to shield. That no one could save him, neither physician nor priest, neither ritual nor statecraft, testifies to the limits of control, the inevitability of disorder, and the price of confusing piety with power. The story leaves you with a troubling question. Are we devoured more by external fate, or by the compulsions with which we try to subdue it? In Philip's dark legacy, Spain learned the terrible cost of mistaking fortification for salvation.